Alex Eala thought her Toronto story was over when she walked off the court, but suddenly her name was back in the conversation around the National Bank Open final. And this time, tournament director Karl Hale was at the center of the buzz. So many fans began framing the moment as an invitation for Eala to remain part of the tournament's biggest weekend, and with everything that had happened around her in Toronto, you can understand why people immediately lost their minds. But before turning that excitement into something it wasn't, there is an important distinction to make. The public comments and posts available from Hale clearly show how much he valued EALA'S presence and the Filipino community's impact on the tournament, but I could not find a publicly verifiable statement confirming a formal invitation specifically asking Eala to attend the National Bank Open final. What is confirmed, though, is already a pretty remarkable story. Think about where Eala had been just days earlier. She arrived in Toronto as one of the hottest names on the women's tour, fresh off the kind of North American run that can change a career almost overnight. Her popularity had grown so quickly that Toronto organizers found themselves dealing with a problem most tournaments would love to have: too many people wanted to see her. Eala publicly explained that the grandstand court had roughly 2,800 seats, while demand connected to EALA'S match appeared to exceed 5,000 tickets. That forced organizers to think bigger and move her into a venue capable of handling the crowd. And once she stepped onto the court, the atmosphere delivered exactly what the organizers were expecting. Philippine flags filled the stands. Fans turned the session into something that felt less like a routine WTA match and more like a national event. Toronto's massive Filipino community showed up with the kind of energy normally associated with a hometown favorite, and even people around the tournament who had seen plenty of big stars were talking about how different this felt. Eala later called Eala an absolute blessing to tennis and spoke publicly about how her arrival had created experiences the National Bank Open had never seen before. That's why the idea of Hale wanting Eala involved through the final weekend didn't sound crazy to fans. The relationship between the tournament and Eala had already moved beyond simply putting her name on an order of play. Organizers adjusted around her audience. The tournament embraced the Filipino community. Food offerings were changed. Eala later wrote that officials listened to supporters and even responded to requests for particular music. He described the Filipino community's spirit, breathing, and enthusiasm as something genuinely moving and said Eala and those fans had helped make the 2026 National Bank Open special. That is a major compliment coming from the man responsible for running the event. And it also explains why EALA'S departure from the singles draw didn't immediately end the conversation about her. Usually, when a player loses, attention shifts fast. Tennis moves on brutally quickly. The next match begins. The next star walks onto court. The headlines reset. But Eala had become bigger than one result in Toronto. Her matches had created ticket demand. Her fans had changed the sound of the stadium. Her presence had changed parts of the tournament experience itself. When that happens, a player doesn't simply disappear from the story because the scoreboard says the run is over. And that's where the final weekend speculation picked up steam. For supporters, the idea was emotional. Imagine Eala returning to the same venue after her own campaign had ended, this time not carrying the pressure of having to win a match, but simply being recognized as someone who helped shape the tournament. That would have felt like a victory lap. For tournament officials, it would also make sense from a fan engagement standpoint. Eala had helped attract a passionate audience, and Hale had made it clear publicly that he appreciated what those fans brought to Toronto. But again, appreciation and a formal final invitation are not automatically the same thing. That distinction matters, especially when a headline is designed to hit hard. Still, what we can verify may actually be more interesting than the rumor. Hale didn't treat the Eala phenomenon like some temporary inconvenience. He embraced it. That's important because sports organizations can sometimes be slow to react when a new star suddenly brings in an audience they weren't expecting. Toronto had every opportunity to resist the disruption. Instead, officials saw the demand, moved Eala to a bigger stage, adapted parts of the fan experience, and publicly celebrated the Filipino community. The message was pretty clear: this wasn't a problem. This was an opportunity. And it was good for tennis. Eala's emergence had brought a demographic into the event with incredible passion. Fans who might not normally structure their week around the National Bank Open suddenly knew exactly when Alex was playing. Families followed her matches. Filipino Canadians traveled to the grounds. Flags became part of the visual identity of her sessions. This is the kind of fan connection that tournaments cannot simply manufacture with an advertising campaign. It has to be earned. Eala earned it through results, representation, and the emotional connection she has built with Filipinos around the world. And Toronto happened to be the perfect place for that connection to explode. The Greater Toronto Area has a huge Filipino community, so once Eala arrived with momentum and genuine star power, the ingredients were already there. Ticket demand became the first warning. The atmosphere became the proof. And Ali's public reaction afterward showed that tournament leadership understood what had happened. That reaction also matters for Eala's future. When tournament directors see that a player can move tickets and bring new communities into the sport, it changes the way that player is viewed beyond rankings. That don't mean results suddenly stop mattering. They matter more than anything. But professional tennis is also an entertainment business, and a player who can compete at an elite level while bringing thousands of emotionally invested fans into the building becomes incredibly valuable. Eala is increasingly becoming that kind of player. And what makes this story especially powerful is that she doesn't need a manufactured controversy to create attention. Her fans show up because they believe in her. They see a Filipina competing at the highest level and feel represented by her journey. That's why Ali's praise resonated so deeply. It felt like the tournament itself was acknowledging what Filipino supporters had already been saying: Alex Eala wasn't simply another name in the draw. She had changed the event. Ali's later message thanked the Filipino community and emphasized how their enthusiasm had added something unique to the National Bank Open. He also pointed toward the broader future of women's tennis, describing players like Eala and Canada's Leila Fernandez as athletes capable of bringing new communities into the game. That's a much bigger story than one invitation. It means people at the highest level of tournament organization are noticing that Eala's value reaches beyond her individual matches. Maybe that is what made the final weekend idea so appealing. Fans didn't want Toronto's relationship with Eala to end with a loss. They wanted one more moment. One more appearance. One more chance for the crowd to show appreciation without worrying about whether the next forehand landed inside the line. And after everything that happened, who could blame them? But the responsible way to tell this story is not to turn fan excitement into a confirmed event that public sources do not establish. The real story is that Karl Hale publicly embraced Alex Eala's impact. He praised what she brought to tennis. His tournament reorganized around extraordinary demand for her matches. And after the event, he went out of his way to thank the Filipino community for helping make the National Bank Open special. That might not sound as explosive as saying, Karl Hale officially invited Alex to the final. But in the bigger picture, it may mean more. Because invitations last one night. Recognition like this can change how tournaments treat a player for years. The next time Eala enters Toronto, nobody will be surprised when thousands of Filipino fans show up. Nobody will wonder whether she needs a bigger court. Nobody will look at her ranking alone and assume that tells them how many tickets she can move. Toronto already learned that lesson. Karl Hale already saw the evidence. And the Filipino fans made sure nobody could miss it. So whether or not a formal final invitation ultimately existed behind the scenes, one thing is absolutely clear from the public record: Alex Eala left Toronto having made an impression far larger than one tournament result. She arrived as a tennis player. She left as part of the identity of the event. And if this summer is any indication, the next tournament that gets Alex Eala isn't simply getting another name in the draw. It's getting the crowd, the flags, the noise, and an entire community ready to follow her wherever the story goes next.